When Chris sent me an email asking me to share some thoughts on the subject, Are We Willing for Peace? She kindly included the quote from the Tibetan to help me go in the right direction. And it's the same quote that you'll find on your program, so if you want to follow along, I'll just read it to you. The Tibetan says, peace as the expression of the will of Shambhala produces balance, equilibrium, synthesis, and understanding, plus a spirit of invocation, which is basically an action producing reaction. And this demonstrates as the first great creative and magical work which humanity is capable, swinging as it does all the three divine aspects into simultaneous activity in line with the will of God. So the question arises, what exactly is the nature of this peace which is so desirable? And what do we have to do to encourage its development and expression, thus putting ourselves individually and collectively in line with that great energy which we are calling the Shambhala force? Peace and love are two examples of words and concepts of which we are very familiar. And yet when we are asked to really explain what they mean, they become very strange and mysterious. Certainly the concept of the will of God is one of the least easy to comprehend, yet it is a concept used all the time to justify all sorts of actions and phenomena. Why the climate is changing, to why all sorts of suffering are inflicted upon us, the will of God is used to remove all sense of responsibility and to give us peace of mind. So we can see that peace as an expression of this will is equally challenging to pin down. So let's start rather high and then work down into everyday living and expression. From our work with the meditation of synthesis, and with going beyond our own planet's confines, we learned that there is a great triangle of beings which express certain energies. The avatar of synthesis, the spirit of peace, and the Buddha form a solid triangle radiating their collective energies to the Christ for his work of eliminating those materialistic and selfish barriers within humanity. And these prevent the work of redemption from progressing and the plan from working out. And we can get a hold of this idea if we consider this triangle much like the spiritual triad, working through the soul as it redeems the personality. In terms of ray energies, it's interesting to note that this triangle standing behind the Christ expresses the three divine aspects which humanity will, quote, swing into simultaneous activity in line with the will of God. The avatar of synthesis expresses the first ray of will and power and the seventh ray of order, bringing spirit and matter together, the highest and the lowest meeting together to create a whole on earth as it is in heaven. The spirit of peace expresses the fourth ray of harmony through conflict and the second ray of love. It's also called the spirit of equilibrium. And the Buddha expresses the third ray of intelligence, the perfected mind, and his teachings on the noble middle way show how the fourth ray can be used to accomplish and release from suffering. And the four rays of attribute become absorbed into the third ray of aspect so that light, love, and power radiates through this triangle in a way that Christ can use. Peace as an expression of the will of Shambhala seems to have a multifaceted nature. We think of the will in terms of fire, the fiery will of God, the first ray of destruction, the electric fire, etc. Yet we also use the term the peaceful, silent will. And we also learn that the fourth ray of harmony through conflict becomes a ray of synthesis when raised to its highest level. So somehow in our minds, we have to bring together these two aspects of the will and its expression as peace. We have that difficult task of trying to understand, as the Bible expresses it, that peace which passeth understanding. And we're always faced with the duty to see clearly which level of understanding we wish to analyze. The Buddhists like to speak in terms of absolute truth and relative truth. And while we toss around these lofty concepts, we must realize that we're trying to understand absolute things which are way beyond our normal minds to grasp. This is not lost time, however, since it stimulates the imagination and plants the seeds of understanding which may in time, in future lifetime, grow into a realized fact in consciousness. Relative truth involves how to get from where we are in the moment to the next level of consciousness, which is broader and more inclusive. So it's the nitty-gritty, the way things work on everyday practical levels, using our lower minds, seeking to be in tune with those parts of ourselves which are broader and more inclusive. So we're told that the theme of right relationship characterizes the goal of our planetary logos. And so we can assume that peace involves this right relations on many levels. Peace can be seen as right group relations. One of the focuses of the triangle work this year was on group unity and how each unit has three responsibilities. One responsibility is to those little lives which make up the unit. Another is to the identity of the unit itself. And the third responsibility is to the greater unit of which that unit is a part. So the group then becomes a very relative but all-encompassing thing. We as individual units have a responsibility to all those little lives which make up our physical, emotional, and mental bodies. We are God to these little units of living energy. We are literally He in whom they live and move and have their being, which is quite a responsibility. And we can see that what we eat, how we act, what emotions we express, and the thoughts which we think affect those little lives and the nature of the group which is ourselves. And billions of little lives make up our individual group unit, and these lives function according to our will and intention. If we push too hard, the strain on these little lives become unbearable, and the systems which make up our group breaks down. If our intention is too weak, there's no clear message to keep the group progressing. Disorder appears with all the problems of health which may eventuate. If we don't love ourselves, the little lives miss the warmth, which leads to health and inner cooperation between the different systems. It seemed always to me to be a good idea before the morning meditation to kind of just say a little appreciation and thank you to those little lives for permitting me to be in this world of phenomena. And the second responsibility is to ourselves as individual units. The work of determining who we are and what is our role as individuals is the nuts and bolts of spiritual training and the path of probation, discipleship, and initiation. The nature of synthesis implies that the individual stays individual, which simultaneously merging with the greater whole. And the third responsibility is to the greater whole, our family, our group, our community, our nation, our planet, our solar system, and beyond. An interesting quote by the Tibetan can put this into perspective. And he says, all that is to be seen might be regarded as a gigantic endeavor on the part of a great intelligence to produce a group. And evolution is to be regarded, therefore, as a vast experiment with this objective in view. So if peace is right group relations, we can see how all permeating it is on all three levels of our group relationships. Peace is such a hot topic these days, and it seems to have been ever since man entered into relationship with those around him. It's become so banal to talk about world peace that jokes are made when, for instance, in beauty contests, Miss America, Miss France, I know, they ask the contestant, what do you hope for? And she says, world peace. And then they say, a dumb blonde, and everyone criticizes her on the internet. So peace has gotten bad press. And there's so much glamour surrounding peace that no one tries to go deeper as to what peace requires. So the question, are we willing for peace, gets to the heart of the problem. Are we willing to do what is necessary for true peace to emerge? We've discussed how peace and harmony through conflict are related, and it's interesting to note that this year's focus on dissipating glamour has taken the glamour of harmony into consideration. The harmony which is based on personal satisfaction and comfort, and on building walls around ourselves that lead to separation and inertia, is much like the peace which is based on wanting to be left alone with no responsibility for others. The Hindus talk of sattva, rajas, and tamas as how energy expresses itself. Rajas is aggressive going forward, tamas is kind of inert, and sattva is harmonious balance. Peace has developed in people's minds as a kind of inert stasis, where there's all love and light, but with little engagement in the very act of living and growing. The fire has been taken out of the quest for peace. And perhaps this is a normal reaction to the Great War of 1914 to 45. We can imagine how the fatigue and the suffering resulted in a desire for rest and recuperation. Yet now we can't afford to let things continue as they are. We must learn the lesson from the peace treaty which followed the first part of the war. The treaty was not based on an understanding of the causes which caused the war in the first place, and it made punishment and retribution such a large part of the treaty that the second part of the war was inevitable. Peace cannot be something which papers over unredeemed and unsettled issues. It cannot be based on expedients and deals which favor one group and not another. Peace cannot be seen as an absence of war or conflict, because this leads to a kind of a stasis and a status quo which becomes quickly inert and solidifies the great imbalances we see today concerning the proper distribution of the world's resources, for example. So where to start? Certainly, most of you would agree that it must start with ourselves. This is the ABC of spiritual training and the basis of the Arcane School with the triangular study, meditation, and service as a way of life. So the question arises, are we willing to make peace with ourselves? Are we willing to bridge those gaps within ourselves caused by wrong thinking, fear, guilt, shame, and all those other obstacles and barriers which are obscuring our inner vision and thus our outer vision? To touch that inner peace which we can then share with others requires the kind of mind which is open and inclusive, which can allow the space for seemingly conflicting viewpoints and isn't afraid to accept those thoughts and feelings which don't make us feel secure in the inert and protective way. It seems that the art of listening is primordial in our quest for peace. It's important for us to listen to what our bodies are telling us when we eat certain foods or engage in certain activities. It's important for us to listen and to feel when our bodies tighten, when certain emotions are stimulated and thoughts are reflected upon. When we become aware of ourselves, we can then become aware of how others feel and experience life with all the ups and downs. And to develop those attitudes and then actions which let peace emerge. We have to be willing to keep our boundaries supple, both inner and outer, and stay open to those ideas which seem foreign to us. One characteristic of tamasic inert peace is to stay within our comfort zones of mental security. This includes only reading those newspapers, watching those news shows which correspond to our way of thinking. This develops that attitude of mind which says we are right and they are wrong. We feed ourselves on ourselves and develop that subtle sense of separation which militates against true peace. Peace must always be inclusive, take into consideration all points of view, and then move forward in new and potent livingness. Alice Bailey always instructed her students to read widely on all subjects and then develop what she called a well-stocked mind. The current political situations in many countries are the result of isolating points of view, a kind of mental sclerosis. And true listening brings about a spirit of cooperation and is the basis of true communication. We can see talk shows today and debates when people talk all at the same time, raising their voices to drown out the opposing views. Peace and cooperation cannot develop in that attitude, with that attitude and in this atmosphere. In his book, Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, the Tibetan Buddhist teacher Chögyam Trungpa says this about communication: simplicity and precision in communication. The process of communication can be beautiful if we see it in terms of simplicity and precision. Every pause made in the process of speaking becomes a kind of punctuation. He says, speak, allow space, speak, allow space. And he says it doesn't have to be a formal and solemn occasion, but it is beautiful that you are not rushing. Busyness and rushing around in our busy lives, listening to talking heads who are always experts and know exactly what is best for us, certainly militates against peace. I was always shocked when I watch news programs and that they're always up in the upper right-hand corner with the ongoing stock market quotations. And I mean, we can't develop peace as long as we're addicted to selfish materialism. Peace can only come about when we begin to look past our own auras, those filters which we have created and which reflect back to ourselves our own limitations. We can only develop true cooperation with others when we can meet them on a neutral ground, willing to accept that they are just as important as we are and that their needs are as valid and worthy of consideration as our own. Alice Bailey sums it up well when she says, goodwill nourishes the spirit of understanding. and fosters the manifestation of the principle of cooperation. And this cooperative spirit is the secret of all right human relations and the enemy of competition. And cooperation naturally leads to sharing, as both sides realize that a win-win situation is much better than win-lose. There's nothing very mystical and mysterious about all this, just good common sense. It's interesting to note that in the West, we think of the mind being in the head, while in the East, the mind was considered to be in the heart. Yet the Bible talks about a man thinketh, as a man thinketh in his heart, so he is. And the Buddhists talk about bodhicitta, that combination of mind and heart substance, which is the true Buddha nature or soul. And this is the basis of compassion, and is the vehicle by which the will to good expresses itself as goodwill, love in action. So then peace can only come about when we are willing to dig deeply and find that bodhicitta within ourselves and recognize it in others. We will then stop talking through or past people and take the time to listen. I remember when I was touched in 1966 by the song by Simon and Garfunkel, The Sound of Silence. And that famous line, people talking without speaking, people hearing without listening. It's very appropriate 50 years later. In a recent World Goodwill newsletter, the section entitled Agents of the Future, the Presencing Institute was featured, and their work with the 7 essential leadership capacities was discussed. And the first final capacity is the holding the space of listening. Listening to others, listening to oneself, and listening to what energies are from the collective. Effective listening requires the creation of open space in which others can contribute to the whole. Are we willing for peace? Are we willing to give up our criticisms and pet theories and self-righteous indignation and learn to listen and develop compassion? In closing, I'd like to share with you a few words from the Buddhist nun, Pema Chodron. And this is what she has to say. She says, in the process of discovering bodhicitta, the journey goes down, not up. It is as if the mountain pointed towards the center of the earth, instead of reaching into the sky. Instead of transcending the suffering of all creatures, we move towards the turbulence and doubt. We jump into it. We slide into it. We tiptoe into it. We move toward it however we can. We explore the reality and unpredictability of insecurity and pain. And we try not to push it away. If it takes years, if it takes lifetimes, we let it be as it is. At our own pace, without speed or aggression, we move down and down. With us move millions of others, our companions in awakening from fear. At the bottom, we discover water, the healing water of bodhicitta. Right down there in the thick of things, we discover the love that will not die. Peace as the expression of the will to good will demonstrate in new and potent livingness when we as individuals and a worldwide group will to strengthen that which is emerging. So let vision come and insight, let the future stand revealed. And let us will to bring to light the love which underlies the happenings of the time.
Thank you.